I think they pivoted, because I think 2 years ago when I was looking at these products, this company was trying to create better vision models for generating images or for generating videos, and it's targeting the consumer market. But now it seems that they are trying to target general world models. And then for sci-fi, yes, they are trying to create a new open architectures to gain strategic importance. And this means that there has been a divergence or a diversification for investors to no longer only pursue AMD or NVIDIA. And I think we'll see. We'll see in 5 to 10 years' time what is going to happen to NVIDIA's and their biggest, I think that the biggest competitive edge. I think with so many labs being invested in the recent times, this will pose huge challenges to NVIDIA, and yeah, I think this is going to be interesting competition in the coming few years. So that is why I think there are 3 things I noticed. One is the center is now moving from models towards the durable control of compute chips, cloud capacity, and system efficiency, and it will make AI investment much more expensive than the past. So that is why we have Microsoft in Japan, Broadcom with Google, Meta with CoreWeave, and areas raising at such a large scale, given its first round or like second round. And then secondly is that we are seeing the ecosystem is no longer just startups raising venture money. We are seeing much more feeder funds or mega funds or later stage funds raising simultaneously. And there is a concentration of capital towards certain firms, and there is a concentration of capital towards certain VC funds. And thirdly is that it's like a same old thing that we are noticing. The next narrative, if the market wants to keep the narrative going, is to try and move towards physical world control. So there will be companies that tries to pursue what AI can perceive, what they can optimize, and what they can operate in the real world scale. And that's the first part for today's market news. Now we'll come to Marc Andreessen, which is the founder of A6 and Z. So here's a bit of a story of Marc Andreessen. He was an engineer that co-created Mosaic, which is one of the first browser in the world, which later on Mosaic turned into a new name, which is called Netscape. Because before Mosaic, we had the internet, but nobody has the ability to, let's say, read images on the internet, or to make sure that this is understandable to not just programmers, but also to massive users. And that is Mosaic. Mosaic is the prototype for creating a browser. You can have images, you can have videos, and you can have the structured data being presented in a much more visualized way. And this was I think this was one of the first browsers in the world. He then turned into Netscape, and then sold Netscape to AOL, which later on turned into Opsware. He built Opsware, which is an interesting product because it was back in 1999. There was not this concept of cloud computing, and Amazon Web Service has to wait for 10 years to raise their first data center. But at the same time, Marc Andreessen back in 1999 has already been building a data center for cloud computing already. And then he co-founded A6Z, now manages over $90 billion. So we shouldn't see him as a pure investor. He is an engineer, a builder, and he has lived through multiple platform shifts. If you consider the early internet bubble, and then all the way to the software era, and then all the way from software era to the AI era, he has seen all of these big cycles. So this is a deep breakdown of his journey. He co-created one of the first mass adopted graphical web browsers, which then turned into a first navigator called Netscape. And Netscape, its IPO from $25 to $75 at the time, triggered out the entire Silicon Valley. And that was the beginning point for the internet bubble. Then he built a company called LoudCloud, which is, I think, perhaps one of the earliest cloud computing companies. They thought of the idea of selling compute in a data center back in 1990s, and without other people noticing that during that time. And but I think unfortunately the company almost failed because after 2000s the internet bubble bursted, and they had to figure out another way. And then they created Opsware, and it was later on built and sold to an HP for $1.6 billion. Then he created a platform called Ning. Nobody remembers it, but Ning, if you look it up, it's one of the first social platforms for communities. For example, let's say there are 5 to 6 communities, and he believes that for each of these communities, there will be an individual social platform for every one of them. So you can use his tool to create a social network platform on a website, and it can be individualized for your company or for your community that you're building, for a school, for basically anything. It's like a tailored Facebook for every single community that needs a Facebook. And then he co-founded with Ben Horowitz, A16Z, and to build a conviction that software would eat the world, which was a very famous blog he wrote. And from 2008 and onwards, he is still the board member for Meta, and he has been one of the key, I think, decision makers behind Facebook's transition to metaverse, and then from Meta all the way to its current AR strategies. So, what are some of his core theses as a person? We are seeing, interestingly, many investors nowadays, they all have this assumption that technology will create abundance. And the logic chain is that technology will create productivity growth. And this will lower the prices for, let's say, in this context, biotechnologies, for, let's say, trials, for, let's say, data collections, for discovery of medicines. And previously, many of the experiments, many of the supply chain for, let's say, the biotech industry, take that as an example, has been really costly. But with the lower prices, there will be large amounts of supply. And previously, those that are blocked out of the industry or that didn't manage to expand due to the cost constraints will now have greater demand to do so. And this will create new industries. And then this will bring up with abundance. So that is why he is a technology maximalist and also a technological optimist. And to him, the danger is about growth stagnation, regulatory rent-seeking, cartelization, and society losing the ability to build. And that is why he wrote an essay called "It's Time to Build" back in the 2020s during the pandemic, where he condemns the United States government and the industries without the stronger capability for manufacturing. For example, they cannot make masks. They cannot make some of the most basic I would say items for coping with the pandemic. And that is why, to him, he sees AI as an application that is bounded with compute, with energy, with manufacturing, and with national capacity. And he has very strong ideology. So if you look at his speeches on politics, you can selectively look at that because he will have very distinct views from other investors. So he has been writing a large amount of very, I would say, famous blogs. For example, the first one is called the Startup Essays. And this was the first time for anyone to realize that the only thing really matters to early stage companies is not about distribution. It is to figure out what's the product market fit in the first place. And this essay was written during the time when Marc Andreessen and Ben Horowitz, they were founding the company Loud Cloud. And during this journey, he realized that how important it is to find a PMF. And then he started to write an essay called "Why Software is Eating the World." This was a response. This was the response to Wall Street, actually, during that time, to suspect that the internet is having a bubble. And they were questioning Apple. They were questioning the majority of technology companies at the time. There was a famous quote from Peter Thiel as well, is that there's absolutely no bubble in technology. And Marc Andreessen also responded to say why software it will eat the entire world, taking over the majority of the economy. Now, looking back from then, we'll see that how I think forward-looking this is. And yes, it didn't crash during 2011. Instead, it grew even faster than anyone could imagine. And then to 2020, it was about it's time to build. The problem is not about invention, it's about how you can deploy, you can scale, and how governments, institutions can allocate the resources to deployment and scaling. And later on, he wrote 3 more essays: why AI will save the world, why he's a techno optimist, and also about the little tech agenda, which is about startups, state power, and US competitive position. So there are different stages for Marc Andreessen. You will see that from the early times, what his essays share about, and then the middle ages of him, and then the current stages. He primarily focused on startup mechanics in the past, which later on changed to looking into sector changes. And now he's trying to look at civilizational doctrines, for example, AI as a strategic imperative, policy as a battlefield in geopolitics. He himself has been primarily engaged and promoting the competition for US and China. So nowadays, I think he talks less like a conventional investor, and he is trying to shape more, trying to shape ideology, trying to shape technology and to accelerate it to the maximal. And that's, I think, his personal journey. So there are 3 investment philosophy for Marc Andreessen. One is called market wins. It was a famous quote called, a good market will pull a viable product out of a company, a bad market will bury a good team. So probably when you start a company, please pick up a good market. And this is a very obvious fact, but many founding teams, they fail to realize that. And in the real practice of building startups, most companies, they will choose a wrong market to start off. And then is PMF first, then distribution. So before PMF, nothing else really matters. After PMF, your company should become a distribution engine. So the real winning will become how you can be more distribution centric instead of being product centric. But there are people opposing that, because there are people that believes product-led growth is the best form of growth during the SaaS ages. And so it is debatable. But to Marc Andreessen, this is clearly his philosophy. And then we come into category rewriting. There are VCs that look at feature layers. For example, oh, we are a SaaS company creating maybe a slightly different feature with the other SaaS company, and we have a distinct. Let's say we have a distinct amount of clients. We have steady returns, and we have very clear exit plan with 3x or 4x multiples. These are the companies probably not going to be invested by Marc Andreessen. He's looking at the companies that will shift the entire industry workflows, for example, in manufacturing, in robotics, as well as in biotech. So some of his famous investments include LinkedIn, Meta, Twitter, Skype, up to you. And then during his time at ACCZ, he also led the investments into Airbnb, Coinbase, GitHub, Figma, Roblox. You will see that many of the major platforms nowadays are all invested by Marc Andreessen. And he has been investing massively into software, into network businesses, into developer infrastructure, crypto, and AI systems. And I guess this is an evidence of what kind of world Marc Andreessen is trying to back by himself. And if we can grasp some of his investment philosophy and trying to predict where are the next big platform shifts, I think probably we can also do a great job. So this is why we should learn from Marc Andreessen. But as a person individually, one thing you will notice from all of his blogs is that he speaks really, really fast. So it would take a long time for you to get to catch up with his speed of thinking and with his speed of speaking. And he is an unusually intense reader and synthesizer, and he has been reading since childhood for quote-unquote sense-making. And on a public level, he is highly analytical, and he's impatient with very model thinking, unusually willing to absorb criticism as the price of trying to make the future arrive sooner. And he's someone that is combative. He's someone sensitive to disrespect and more comfortable with hard-edge argument than soothing consensus. So So yeah, this is Marc Andreessen as a person, and usually you will see many of the investors being famous nowadays. They all have very similar traits, or somehow stranger traits than regular people. And there was this very famous quote called "The best entrepreneurs live in the future." And if we're trying to bring up his thinking towards biotech, which is the one we're trying to touch upon today, I think there are several questions he might ask. One is that, do we think biology is now sufficiently readable, measurable, and data-rich for software iteration? Because for software to work on biology, these are the premises to satisfy. And secondly is that, how do we assess whether or not this market is big and also this market is broken? And we always love a big and broken market, because this means there is a huge problem to solve with huge returns. And then if we focus on PMF, where this will appear in the first place, is it going to be in the drug? Is it going to be in data infrastructure, lab workflows, or regulatory tooling? And lastly is, where does the mode ultimately land? There will be investors or people that naturally said, oh, it's going to be about the models. But is it really so? And is it going to be in data flywheels, workflow ownership, regulatory capability, or distribution? I think these are some of the questions he might ask. So that is why I think there is another point I want to add on, which is we cannot simply view software investments into biotech investment, because in software, a green market can rescue an okay product. But in biotech, if you did a bad job in the sciences, it doesn't become a good business just because the market is large enough. And within this type of market, scientific validity is part of, I think, both part of the modes, but also part of difficulties for building products. So that is why Marc's framework is powerful in biotech. But before we talk about PMF, there's also a premise for investors to look at, which is science should hold valid before people talk about how to distribute a product and how to reach product market fit. So now we're coming to the part 3, which is AI and biotech. And I think there is a core thesis that is interesting, which is from, let's say, hundreds of years ago all the way to nowadays, biology has become reorganized from an empirical science into something that can be built up into a system. And you can predict the system using existing data, and you can iterate the engineering behind. You can also iterate upon the experiments. Because if we can standardize experiments and standardize many of the processes in biological discovery, then platforms can be applied, and this is what the opportunity comes from. So I think AI is not improving one step; it is going to connect the entire chain. And also, we're coming to the question of why now. I think there are 4 recent conditions that are converging. One is, probably everyone knows, Google DeepMind got something called the AlphaFold 3. And because of that, the creators of AlphaFold won a Nobel Prize in biology, even though he is a computer scientist. And AlphaFold 3 jointly models proteins, nucleic acids, small molecules, and it is good at discovery of new forms of proteins. And it is extremely efficient at it compared with the traditional methods. And then when it comes to data infrastructure, we already have companies like Benchling. We'll talk about that later. Dotmatics that's been sold to Siemens, Tamper, Sapio, so that you can have R&D data and clinical data AI ready to train your infrastructure. And then it is about regulations. Because one of the hard parts for biotechnology industry is about how regulations will change. And FDA has received 500 plus AI component submissions between 2016 to 2023. And now they're releasing credibility guidance 2025. And there will be joint principle between FDA and EMA in 2026. And lastly is that there has been capital commitment towards this field. For example, for Roche, they are expanding the GPU infra, and for Eli Lilly company, they're expanding in silico partnerships, and Isomorphic Labs is also raising a huge amount. So we are looking at the pharmaceutical industry raising hugely and building huge amounts of AI core research and development infrastructure. But then there is going to be a difference between two types of company. One is the tool upgrade company, and second one is the platform rewriting companies. I think in the AI era, it's going to be about the latter ones. What's the tool upgrades? For example, there are tools already helping clinics or help scientists to write reports much faster, and to find trial sites much faster and cheaper documentation. These are some incremental changes that will streamline the workflows, and this has happened already during the SaaS era. But now coming to the AI era, it's going to be more about the platform rewriting. For example, how do we collect data continuously? How do we have automatic experiments? How results can be standardized and fed back towards the models, and this will become a structural shift for the entire biotechnology discovery industry. And building upon that, I think there will be an industry stack. And we always talk about the industry stack in every single one of previous classes. And for this one, if you look from the top to the bottom, there will be 10 different stacks that we can focus on. And each of them will provide an opportunity. But I will also introduce how large the opportunities can be when it comes to the company size, potentially in the future. First of all, I wouldn't say in each of the 10-layer industry stack, they will become a $100 billion company, or they will become the next Roche or Astra or Lilly company. But each one of them will have a potential unicorn, or 2 to 3 unicorns at least. So we have the compute or model layer, and all the way to the data collections, and then to wet labs, which is how do we automatically create experiments. And we also have the biofoundation models, and what the business models are going to be is also something that I think deserves to be looked at. We have drug discovery, for example, for isomorphic labs. And we also have the clinical trial layer. We have the manufacturing layer for on the carrying out side. And we also have the regulation or reimbursement layer for hospitals and for institutions, for example, for universities. And in that sense, there will become different control points during the AI era. And control point has been mentioned multiple times. I think this is something new coming up in the recent investment trends. For example, I think one of them should be the research and design operating system. Benchling, which is a company I will introduce later, is one of the companies that has been dominant in the R&D operating system. Whoever manages experiments, sample protocols, and data collaboration will be the closest to budget costs. And then you have the multimodal patient intelligence, how you can connect with hospital data or with the lab data or the molecular profiling. This will depend on how close you are to every one of these data points. The closer you are to biomarkers, trial matching, and CDX. And next, we're coming to regulatory grade AI tools. This is perhaps one of the biggest barrier to entry for many companies to have. And once you are accepted by regulators, you will have significantly stronger moat compared with other general models. And then you have the ultimate experiment data factories. One example is actually Ginkgo Biolabs. If you look at the stock, they're doing a bad job, but they survived until now. And I guess they're now on the edge of, I would say, of the entire turnaround of the current stance. So I'm looking forward to what Ginkgo Biolabs is going to do in the future. And lastly, we come into commercialization entry points. For example, how to build a compliance CRM, testing distribution, payment and reimbursement pathways. These are all essential. So then it will come to Marc Andreessen style questions to ask based on the framework. First of all, I think, is this a technology inflection point, not instead of a linear improvement? And then you may also try to ask, is software agent the core processes or just an edge assistant? Because there's a huge difference in that. And then we have who will own the default entry point protocol, standard, data, and workflows. Is it the platform? Is it the lab? And then which segment will upgrade from labor-intensive service to high-margin platform? I'll introduce about the CROs in the later part of this of the course. CRO refers to the contracted organizations and usually we try to outsource experiments to the CROs. And question 5 will be on which segment cannot be purely software due to experiments, clinical, manufacturing, or regulation. And next we'll come to how AI is going to bring ordinary growth. Will this market produce a category king? And is it going to be a short-term story, 10-year platform, or both? And what are some of the scarcest assets? Is it the experiments you have? Is it the compute? Is it the sites? And if the company succeeds, what does it ultimately control? Is it going to be the capability, or is it going to be traffic, or data standards? So these are some of the questions when you meet a founder, you can try to ask. So based on that, I think there are some top 5 directions when it comes to the opportunities. I think first of all is biodata infrastructure and scientific operating system. For example, Benchling is one good case. Benchling was invested by ACCZ back in the 2010s, I think late 2010s, and it's now one of the default operating system for scientists to use when it comes to conducting biological experiments. And whoever gets closest to default workflows has got the highest switching cost. You will get the strongest competitive edge. And we also have something called the real-world data investments. This will connect research and development or clinical and commercial data points. Tempus has been doing a great job in that. And then we have clinical trial optimization and regulatory-grade AI. These will be the closest to farmers' time value and real budgets. So companies like Unlearn has been working on that for quite a long time. And next we have, this is a bit ambitious, wet lab automation, self-driving lab. Lila Sciences raised, I think, nearly $400 million for the seed round because they tried to create this automation lab. And this is both one of the biggest opportunities, but also you can also doubt on the difficulties of building the entire autonomous lab, not just from a technological perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective. And lastly, we're looking at the AI MedChem or protein design. For example, China Discovery and Isomorphic Labs, they are working on this part. And because of so many people trying to discuss about how the entire medical discovery or the entire biochem industry will be shifted, there has been over-narrative. I think there are some things that has been frequently overvalued over time. I call them the red flags. One is that there are companies claiming that pure biology foundation models can work out, but pure biology foundation models with no workflow integration will become a very bad business. Because let's say you sell APIs, and for OpenAI, there are more than 200 or 300 million people using it on a daily basis. But for a biology foundation model company, there will be just a couple of thousand large enterprises. Enterprises are not going to pay for your APIs every single day unless you are into their workflow, and that became a default. Or else this kind of business model may fail, not because of technology, but because of how they generate income. And then generic AI drug discovery platforms without proprietary data loops is also an over-narrated thing. And many companies after Isomorphic Labs are trying to claim themselves as AI drug discovery platforms. But the difficulty is not just only about the proprietary data loops, it's also going to be about when it comes to the real experiments, the trial experiments, and how these how regulations can pass on. For example, Isomorphic Labs has been postponing their experiments for this reason. And thirdly, there's a misconception that AI will quickly replace the CROs because they think we have automation already. But I think the execution networks and compliance, they're very, very hard to displace. So it will be a gradual process instead of saying that within just 1 or 2 years, all the CROs, for example, for I think IQVIAs, they are not just a consulting company, but also a company that specializes in outsourcing the experiments and for these large biomedical industry companies. And they have much stronger experiences, and they can pass on the regulatory frameworks But then how do we let AI replace CROs? This will become not just a technology problem. Again, this will become a regulation problem. And then we have the diagnostic AI without reimbursement or clinical workflow embedding. Who is going to pay for diagnostic AI is a good question. In the United States, it's going to be the large insurance companies. But this means to make sure that you will be reimbursed, you need to persuade the insurance companies, not the hospitals, to use you. And this will make diagnostic AI harder to deploy than imagined. And lastly is fully autonomous self-driving lab shouldn't be expected as a near-term reality. And from all of these 5 red flags, there is a common trait we are seeing is some of the biggest constraints towards this industry is not within the technology itself. Instead, it is about the regulations, the distributions, the difficulties in aligning the logistics, in aligning the data, or in business models. So this is, I guess, some of the big changes when it comes to scaling companies nowadays. Because in the 2023 times, I think people will think as long as you have a stronger technology, you're going to win the competition. But now coming to this era, things are going to change more drastically than 2023. So that is why we might not just expect researchers or top scientists to be founders in this field. You should also have people that understand regulation really well or understand business models really well. And there are also some of the most underestimated directions, to my view. One is called CMC, which is chemical manufacturing and control. This is about how massive manufacturing intelligence can be adopted. It's not acting on the physical level, but instead it's going to be, I think it will become something more similar to an agent. And this direction is missed out. Secondly is regulatory grade endpoint or pathology AI. So any company that tries to gain access to regulatory barriers, I think is also an underestimated direction. Number 3 is investing into scientific operating system. We just mentioned that already. Next, we have trial enablement and patient stratification, because this is a very long and very complex progress when it comes to creating trials and running experiments on the patients. Usually, it's going to take a longer time than many people expected. And if someone can automate these processes, I think this would create some kind of like $5 billion company. And but it's not going to be really large. And then lastly, it's coming to software enhanced lab services. So just now we mentioned about the CROs and how not possible it is to quickly replace, but you can always have some partial automation of the CROs. So they also share one common trait, which is these different directions. They are not like a science fiction claiming, oh, we're going to find a cure to cancer. It is going to be where profit pools is closer, and how we can streamline the workflows for this very large, sophisticated industry. And along these chains, there are things that are hard to do, but also correct to do. So given that we mapped some of the startups from the workflow, we have the Dotmatics that have been sold already to Siemens. We have Unite Labs. This is an interesting one because it's trying to create a system to connect every single equipment within a lab. For example, no matter it is made in the 1960s or it is made in 2020s, Unite Labs can all put them in the same data infrastructure. And then we have Notec that is in collecting proprietary data, Wave, and then for AI discovery, we have Evolutionary Scale, Child Discovery Manus, and for our native therapeutics, we have Isomorphic Labs. For manufacturing, we have Solaris, Apprentice, and I think many of these are very strong companies. And you can see from the ticket size how expensive it is to genuinely invest into biotech. So there will be some bottlenecks coming to the industry. I think there can be some 10 of them. One is how we can target validity against human biology. And usually people will doubt how strong AI can produce these valid results. And then training data quality, traceability is also a huge constraint. And that is why some of the companies just now mentioned, they're trying to solve this problem. We also have assay design inconsistency causing the drifts and slow high quality wet lab data generation, all the way to the regulation part, to the manufacturing part, to organizations within, let's say, hospitals, pharmaceuticals, and labs. And lastly, to reimbursement, budget attribution, and ROI proof. So this means solving problems in this industry is much more complicated than people can imagine. And sometimes I started to doubt from time to time how many GPT wrappers can survive the market, given how hard it is to analyze and also to catch up every single bottleneck and to control some of the points. Is it sometimes I do believe that for companies like Y Combinator, many companies they are investing in are essentially not as sustainable as we expected. And I could be wrong, but this is something I felt strongly about. And yes, now last we come into the control point matrix. One, you should be a default workflow, and this is a difficult thing to do. We have mentioned that in many different classes previously. Secondly, you should have a proprietary data pipeline. This is what Notrix has been focusing on. Thirdly, is automated experiment capability. That's more relevant to Lila's core thesis, is to own the largest automated lab. We also have regulations. We also have the access to patient data. Drug assets are also a control point. And lastly is manufacturing and quality systems. And the last point is usually underestimated in the early stages. So there is an uneven distribution of capital. Many investors are just primarily focusing on drug assets and clinical advancements. And I think regulatory credibility from this point to investing in companies has been largely ignored as well. So that is why I try to answer where profit ultimately lands. I think the real kings will not be the companies that tell the best model story. They'll be the ones that own the default entry points, the proprietary data pipeline, and the experimental clinic closed loop. And profits will go to these companies with workflows, data, and regulatory credibilities. And it will also go to a few full-stack therapeutics companies that connect the model to experiment, and lastly to the clinics. And profit will compress for the labor-intensive services in the past, as well as for generic tools that are not embedded into the budgeting systems for biotech companies, as well as for hospitals. Lastly is model-only API vendors without default entry points. So that is why there are 5 industry chains we can look at. One is the research and development operating systems. We have the Benchling, Dotmatics, APO, Viva. We have the multimodal patient intelligence chain. We have Tempus, Okane, and PathAI. And then we have the trial or regulatory workflow chain from Unlearn to Formation Bio. And then we have automated experiment chain, Lila and Ceralis. And lastly, we go into closed loop discovery to development chain, isomorphic labs. These are but the last ones are some of the most ambitious ones. So if let's say assuming you're an investor, it will be a bit cheaper to invest in the R&D operating system, and you will get somehow, I think, much more higher than expected return from investing into the more basic ones instead of investing overly into the neo labs. So the bet is not which company uses AI, it's going to be which company is turning AI into an irreplaceable industrial position. And now I will introduce 2 more companies, 2 last cases. One is called Benchling. They were founded in 2012, and it's the leading life sciences research and development SaaS company. What it does is to digitize and standardize data from lab work across an organization. So let's say within a Mayo Clinic, you can have the same operating system, and this can replace the fragmented legacy systems and paper notebooks. And now more than 200,000 scientists and 7,000 plus institutions are using benchling. And I think in this field, it has been incredibly successful. But you see how limited this market is. For so many years, they now only have 200,000 scientists using it regularly. And the reason is because the target consumers is just a small fraction of researchers. And that is why I'm saying this is not going to bring up with a very huge return, let's say, the next Facebook in biomat, but it's going to be a good return. So what's their business model? One is the freemium SaaS flywheel. They target academics with a free tier, but then when scientists will transition into industry, let's say you go to AstraZeneca, you will bring benchling system with you, and the AstraZeneca is gonna pay money for benchling to continuously let the academia use these tools. They also need the data here from benchling. Secondly, is that there's gonna be enterprise monetization. Startups pay $15,000 a year. Enterprise plans go to $1 million plus a year, and they're now having a pretty fast net expansion rate. And then thirdly is the market share reality. They have about 40% of the cloud-native ELN or the LIMS market, which is primarily focusing on labs. And the average contract value sits around $175,000. So you see, it is not as large market as we expected, but on an individual customer side, it is a very fruitful, I think, piece to look at. And if you're trying to look at the control points, first, it is a default workflow for many scientists. Secondly, it has one of the highest switching costs. So once an organization standardizes its historical experimental data and operational protocols on benchling, migrating away from benchling is going to be very risky. And then thirdly is the Siemens Dotmatics benchmark. Dotmatics is a competitor of them, and they were acquired by Siemens for $5 billion. And I think benchling's trajectory proves that whoever owns the operating system for biology is going to capture the massive durable enterprise value independent of any single drug success. And the second case I want to mention about is Isomorphic Labs. And it's a spin-out out of Google DeepMind by David Hassabis, and it's now trying to build a full-stack AI drug design engine. I think it's not like a traditional biotech that rely on trial and error. Isomorphic Labs use AlphaFold3 to design medicines with partnerships already, along with Eli Lilly as well as with Novartis. One of the biggest modes they have is, of course, the AlphaFold3 heritage. And they're now trying to do from discovery to clinical validation. So this is quite different to pure model vendors. They try to connect structural predictions to actual wet lab validation. And their initial $600 million Series A is an aggressive push into proprietary drug assets. So we can imagine Isomorphic Labs not just as an AI company. I think in the coming 10 to 20 years, possibly this can also be one of the leading medical drug companies in the world, like the next AstraZeneca. This is likely. And then they also is capable of creating dozens of drugs every year, because traditional biotechs, you can develop your 1 to 2 drugs over, let's say, 1 year. From Isomorphic Labs, their goal is to build an automated engine capable of producing dozens of viable candidates annually across oncology, immunology, and cardiovascular diseases. So their control point is the closed loop model. They don't sell an API or a software tool. They are connected to the world's most advanced biological foundation model. They own proprietary data already, along with Lilly or Novartis, and the profit will land towards the direct drug assets, which is the drug. You can just sell drugs using Isomorphic Labs. For benchling, their profits came from software budgets, but for Isomorphic, it's directly whenever a drug comes to the market, a medicine comes to the market, they can earn the money from this. So we just went through many things, from the recent market news all the way to Marc Andreessen's, how he views the market, and what are his journey, what are his biggest takeaways, and all the way to biotechnology investments. And we mentioned about some of the red flags, some of the opportunities, and some of the very hard problems that we might need to solve, and what are the potential with these hard problems. And we're coming to the conclusion here. I think it will rewrite the layers that are already digital enough, standardized enough, and close enough to workflow and budget. So we should expect AI to rewrite the entire biotechnology industry within, let's say, 5 years. Instead, it's always going to be a gradual process, and during this gradual process, there will be opportunities for small unicorns coming out, and the winners, they shouldn't be, and they are not going to be the best model storytellers. They will be the ones that actually own a default entry point, for example, like benchling. They should have proprietary data like Nozick, and the experiment to clinic closed loop. And this is what I view when it comes to how AI may reshape the workflows in biotechnology industry. It's not going to be a pretty fancy one to say, oh, it's going to change this, it's going to change that, it's going to be so exciting. But I guess this is a solid thesis that if you're interested in this field in the future, probably this can be useful to anyone that's trying to invest across the entire supply chain or the industry chain. And whenever I have questions, just feel free to ask.